Okay, so you're joining us because you want to get past the headlines, right? To really understand the core issues. Today, we're diving into something pretty significant coming out of Nigeria. The army there has just confirmed that Boko Haram fighters are now using armed drones, specifically in Borno State. And this isn't just a small adjustment in tactics. It really feels like it could change things on the ground.
It absolutely could. Our sources, mainly recent news reports, point to this as a really concerning development. We need to unpack what this means, this emerging drone threat, because it sounds like we're talking about something more sophisticated than, just weaponized hobby drone.
Yeah, exactly. The theater commander, Major General Abdulsalam Abubakar, was quite clear. He used the specific term armed drones being used in the Northeast.
And the comparison he made, that's what really jumps out. He said they're similar to the ones deployed in countries like Israel and Ukraine. Now, that phrasing, it suggests a certain level of capability, doesn't it? Potentially more lethal, more advanced than, say, improvised devices.
It definitely does, and it raises immediate questions about what that means for troop safety, for how the military plans its operations now.
Precisely. And the military's own assessment highlights the difficulty. They've stated these drones are difficult to detect using conventional radar systems.
Right. That sounds like a huge problem for their existing defenses. Why is that exactly? Is it their size or?
It's likely a mix of things. Smaller drones, maybe using composite materials, they just don't show up well on traditional radar, a smaller radar signature. Plus, if they fly low, they can get lost in the ground clutter. Makes them really hard to pick out.
Okay, so detection is a major hurdle. That gives the insurgents a real edge.
A significant one.
Yeah.
And the military will be looking at other ways to spot them, I imagine. Acoustics, maybe infrared. But it's a challenge, and critically, this isn't hypothetical. The Army says they've been observing this pattern since November last year.
So for several months now, it's an active, evolving threat.
Yes. And it seems to fit into a wider shift in Boko Haram's approach. The general mentioned they're now resorting to multi-pronged attacks on isolated and vulnerable deployments.
Multi-pronged attacks. That sounds more coordinated, more strategic maybe.
It does. And there's a clear propaganda element to it, too, according to the military. They explicitly said these attacks are used as propaganda. So it's not just about the physical damage, it's about projecting strength, creating fear, maybe trying to show the government isn't in control, The
psychological impact, you hear drones, you think attacks from the sky, maybe undetected. It's got to be unnerving.
Absolutely.
And we've seen these tactics play out recently, haven't we? The reports mention coordinated attacks in places like Ran, Dikwa, and Gachiram.
That's right. Though the Army reported repelling most of them, the incident in Ran is stark. A breach occurred there, and sadly, the loss of 4 personnel was reported. It shows these tactics, including potentially the drones, can be deadly effective.
So the threat picture is definitely changing. How's the Nigerian army responding?
Well, they're clearly taking it very seriously. The general said they are reviewing our deployments to counter their evolving strategies, and that they've been actively re-strategizing over the past 2 months. That signals a major internal assessment is underway.
And it seems to come from the top down. The Chief of Army Staff visited recently, leading to major changes, including General Abubakar himself being appointed theater commander just, 3 weeks before these reports?
Yes, that timing suggests a real push to adapt leadership and strategy quickly. But, we also have to consider the sheer scale they're operating in. This theater operation spans over 150,000 square kilometers. That's just vast.
150,000 square kilometers. It's hard to even picture.
It is. The report said it's larger than several countries combined. They used the example of the Timbuktu Triangle, apparently larger than rivers and ocean states put together, or even countries like Jamaica or Kosovo.
Wow. Okay, so monitoring that kind of area, especially against small, hard-to-detect threats like drones, is a monumental task.
Monumental, exactly. And it's not happening in a vacuum.
You mean the wider region?
Yes, the instability across the Sahel. General Abubakar mentioned this directly. He talked about barracks in neighboring countries being overrun, weapons getting looted.
And those weapons then finding their way into Nigeria.
Through vast and porous borders, yes, it fuels the conflict. It's frustrating because, according to the general, progress was being made. They felt the conflict was nearing an end 2 years ago. But this regional instability, the flow of arms, maybe new technologies like these drones, it seems to have reversed some gains.
That's a sobering thought. Despite all that, what's the message from the Army leadership now? Is it one being overwhelmed?
No, not at all. The message seems quite firm. General Abubakar insisted that Nigerian troops remain highly motivated and resilient. He attributed this partly to improved welfare packages, which is interesting.
Right. Practical support matters for morale.
Absolutely. And he reaffirmed their goal to defeat terrorism and restore peace to this region as swiftly as possible.
So, commitment remains high despite the new challenges.
That's the stated position. And it's important, for balance, to look at the progress that has been made over the longer term. The general did make that point too. He said, terrorist activities have been greatly degraded and normalcy has largely returned to the northeast region compared to 5 or 10 years ago.
That's crucial context, isn't it? So, while this drone threat is new and serious, the overall situation isn't like it was at the peak of the insurgency.
Exactly. Things have improved overall, even with these setbacks.
And are there tangible signs of that returning normalcy?
Yes. He mentioned specifically that most citizens have returned to their communities and socioeconomic activities have resumed. He gave examples like Malam Fatori and Kukawa, where he said nearly 20,000 internally displaced persons are back home.
20,000 people returning. That's significant. That's just a certain level of security has been reestablished in those areas.
It does. And the military emphasizes their ongoing efforts are comprehensive. Warfare isn't just one thing, it's multiple campaigns, coordinated operations. Success is measured by the overall balance.
And they're still having tactical successes.
Apparently so. The report mentioned that in the past week alone, over 20 terrorists have been neutralized and several weapons recovered. So the fight continues on the ground daily.
But it's not just a military solution, is it? I saw a mention of Sun Tzu.
Ah, yes. General Abubakar quoted the classic line, "You must separate the fish from the water." His point being that security is a collective responsibility. It needs everyone involved, not just the soldiers.
Separating the insurgents from the population that might shelter or support them, willingly or not?
Precisely. It underlines the need for local cooperation, for intelligence from communities.
Is there evidence that this kind of cooperation is happening?
Well, he gave a pretty concrete example. The recent interception of 13,000 liters of PMS being smuggled to terrorist enclaves at night.
PMS, that's fuel, right? Yeah. Petrol.
Exactly. Premium motor spirit. 13,000 liters. That's a lot of fuel. The military believes that amount could sustain their operations for a year. So stopping that shipment was a major blow, enabled by local vigilance, presumably.
Wow, that really does illustrate the impact local support can have. It directly weakens the insurgents.
It absolutely does. And it leads back to the general's main point on this. The fight against terrorism cannot be won by the armed forces alone.
We need the cooperation and vigilance of every citizen to overcome this challenge. A very clear call for unity.
Indeed. So if we sort of pull all these threads together, what we're seeing is Boko Haram adopting concerning new tech like these armed drones. That poses real detection and defense problems.
Right, a serious evolution.
But at the same time, there has been significant progress in restoring normalcy compared to years past. The situation is complicated by regional instability, feeding arms and fighters into the area, and maybe enabling access to these new technologies.
And the military.
They're responding, adjusting strategies, changing leadership, stating their resolve, but also stressing heavily that this requires a whole-of-nation effort, that civilian cooperation is vital.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? Beyond just Nigeria, how is this spread of, relatively sophisticated drone technology going to change conflicts elsewhere? Especially asymmetric ones.
That's the big question. When non-state groups can access capabilities like this, what does it mean for national defense, for international security cooperation?
And that propaganda angle, too. How central is information, perception, psychological warfare becoming in these modern conflicts? Lots to consider there.